All right, Kelsey, thanks so much for doing this podcast with me. My first question is tell the audience, just a little bit about yourself and how you um uh are what you're doing today.
Sure. So my name is Kelsey Russell. I am known across social media platforms as the Print Princess. So I have dedicated my platform, primarily TikTok, to media literacy. And in order to do so, I use print media as a vehicle to enhance people's media literacy skills, also build a sense of curiosity about what's going on in the news, despite a lot of the really terrible things going on in the world right now and unjust things. Also allow people to have better emotional regulation with the news. And that all started because I just found myself in a place where I felt like I didn't really know what was going on in the world, and I wasn't confident sharing. So I decided I'm going to change the way I consume news, and print media was the first step, and that's still the step that I'm on.
Mm-hmm. So TikTok and print news. So how does that combination work?
Yeah. It kind of worked. I feel like it's important to say I had a social media following before. My platform was all about media literacy, so I had about a following of 40,000 people just doing lifestyle content, college content, get ready with me, humor. And I literally, as a normal person, I had a life outside of the TikToks I was making, and I was just going through a lot of anxiety, going through just a lot of coming of age in this world. And I think if if you go through school, if you go to college, if you go to grad school, you find yourself having a lot of conversations that revolve around what you're studying or as you work the industry that you're in. But what's going on in the world suddenly becomes your own, it suddenly becomes your own responsibility to learn. So I I just was going through that journey, and because I already had a following when I got the newspaper, I said, "Oh my goodness, I have to share what I'm learning with my audience. Like this is so cool." As if it's revolutionary. The newspaper has been around much longer than you and I have been around. And it just it blended. But as I've been on this journey, what I've realized it is it's the perfect way to explore print media because they're not supposed to match, right? Like you're not supposed to see somebody reading an old form of media on the newest, most popular form of media. So I think it just naturally happened, but it's been really important to spread the message, and also in the algorithm world we live in, get people to catch their attention is seeing something on camera that they're not used to seeing, which literally is a newspaper now.
Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering what's going on in the news media right now because oftentimes, it used to be, where we, especially from a journalism background, where you would write, report the news, but I feel like it's gotten all like, and I was having this conversation earlier with someone in the news media news business in Chicago, and she said that oftentimes it's a lot it's a lot there's a lot of narratives when it comes to the stories people write or the stories that are broadcast. So I'm wondering what your take is on that.
Mm, mm. And when you say there's a lot of like, do you mean what is just my view on the status of news right now,
Yeah,
specifically
exactly.
journalism? Okay. So I feel like there's a couple things going on in journalism. We obviously know newsrooms are not making money, which is the most important thing is they have to be profitable. We live in the United States, a capitalist society. If your business is not profitable, you will not exist. So that's the first thing that's going on. And I think that the answer to that is that news has to find new ways to become profitable. The traditional way of we have subscribers and we have advertisers is no longer working. But all of that to say, I don't think I really don't like when people say print media is dead, news is dead, people don't trust the media. I think what has happened is that people have lost a lot of their local journalism, which they only have access to national journalism now. So many people live in a news desert, which means that you don't have access to your local news. So I think people will see larger national papers such as the New York Times, such as a Wall Street Journal, such as the New York Post, and they don't feel represented by those papers. And that is what has caused them to have a lack of trust. I also think what we know now is people are dealing with a lot of news fatigue because I don't think people have ever been consuming more news than they have in our civilization. But we also know that people want to still consume news. Even though it's a fatigue, they want to feel connected to the person they're consuming news from, which is why I think we've seen a rise in more commentary news, why we've seen a rise in news influencers. So I think the state of news right now in media is one that one has to become profitable in a different way. Two, we need to reinstall trust through local media, but also realize that people still want to know what's going on in the world and they want to feel connected to the person who's telling them it.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering what your take is on news gathering versus content creation, because that's content creation is your bread and butter. So I'm wondering, what you distinguish between the two.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a journalist. That's the first thing I always tell my audience. I'm not a journalist. And I'm not a news authority, right? And I say that to my audience because I think it's important for them to know that a lot of the people they're consuming news content from do not have a journalistic background, right? Like a lot of content creators do not know about the ethics that go behind journalism. They don't understand that when you are producing a story, your producer's role and a journalist role is to keep people safe, to make sure that people don't go to jail, to make sure that people leave alive when they write the piece. So I think the difference is that what content creators have done and let me say this, a good content creator, because there are a lot of news content creators that aren't that good, and don't respect journalists and don't even understand how they're getting the news. I think what a good content creator does is distinguishes that, hey, I am not a news authority. I read this. I actually read it. I digested it. I'm interpreting it, and I read it here, and this is who wrote it, right? That's like how if you're writing an essay, that's what you do. You say the source, you give your commentary on it, and you give credit to where you found it. But I think what has to happen is journalists and content creators have to have better relationships because ultimately content creators are the key for news being read. We are the key for news to be consumed for people. So I think we have to get in a world where we can learn from each other, and have better modes of communication, which I think would also go into that profitability model for a lot of newsrooms. So it's a huge difference, and I think a good content creator makes it known that they are not a journalist, at all. And a lot of people fail to do that, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. My next question is like how can creation be more sustainable? Because oftentimes, when journalists and content creators make content, they have to learn how to make money, right? So what's
Yes.
your sort of take on that?
Well, from the content creator side, as I mean, you're essentially an entrepreneur. Like you own your own business, and anybody who owns their own business, I mean, anybody who owns their own business or a big conglomerate like a Procter and Gamble, they know you have to diversify where you're getting your revenue, right? So as a content creator, you cannot put all of your money in content. Like you have to diversify your income. Does that mean you're going to public speak? Does that mean you're going to sell a product? So I think that's on the content creation side is that if you put all of your money in content creation, it absolutely will fail because all we do is rent space on these platforms. All that has to happen is the platform dies and then your source of income is gone. So that's the first thing. But I think when it comes to content creators and journalists and making content to make money, the reality is, like for me, I have worked with companies like the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I've also worked with Microsoft. Obviously, Microsoft has way more money than Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Like that's just, let's be
Yeah.
real here. It's like $1 billion, it was $1 trillion business. So, as a content creator, if you're interested in making content with journalists, I think it's important to realize that some of the opportunities that can come from working with a newsroom or a journalist are bigger than just the money, right? Like you can ask, "Hey, can I be invited to like your gala that's going on? Can I come and sit when you all are hosting an event? Can I meet this journalist and sit down and talk with them?" So I think from the journalist side, it's important for newsrooms to be upfront of like, listen, we don't have influencer money, but what we can do is invite you into spaces that are priceless, that are honestly better than getting a check. So I think that that's where, we have to kind of finagle is that there's more opportunities than just money. And journalistic institutions have huge connections in the world. They always get invited to places, always get invited into spaces. So what does it look like to invite an influencer in? And of course, pay them what you can because they're still doing work and we deserve to get paid. But that's what I think a healthy content creation can look like with journalists is let's get creative about the ways we can get paid outside of money.
Mm-hmm. I'm wondering, like when you create content, you create content for the day, and oftentimes, there are all these mean comments and all these haters and people that are like, oh, this is, oh, the content you're producing is really anti against my views or blah blah blah. All these sorts of mean, hateful comments because we get those a lot. So, like,
Yeah.
how do you sort of filter that, process that, or just like, or do you just like, what the heck?
Oh God, I always say it. It depends what side of the bed I wake up in the morning and how I'm feeling. That's the first thing. However, I first of all, I have never in my life like left a negative comment on somebody's stuff. Like if something bothers me that much, I either report it because it's either not true, it's not factual, or it's harming, or I just block the person, or I ask to not see their content. So I realize that people who choose to go on the internet and take a time to type a mean comment are in a very different space than I am. They're in a very different communication space than I am. But I also know that they want to be heard. That it's, for some reason they don't feel heard, so they feel the need to be heard is to leave a mean comment. So that's what I try to remember too. But I'm also a positive person, like so negative people. I'm like, what happened to you? Why are you like that? Um, so the way I handle it is that you know. I either ignore them. If it's something that's just genuinely bullying and hurtful, I ignore them. If they say something that leans on the side of literally spreading misinformation or disinformation, I will respond back to them because like your comment space as a content creator is your soundboard. Like it's the closest you're going to get to reviews. It's the closest you're going to get to getting feedback. So if somebody says something that's not true and mean, I have to correct them. But I also just remember like, I don't know, people are in super negative spaces in life. And fortunately, I'm not where they are, and I don't choose to wake up and type negative comments. And that is enough of a clap back for me sometimes. So that's
Hmm.
how I handle it. And then sometimes I'll be sassy if I'm really having a day where I'm like, you know what, I want to be heard too. So that's when I usually answer that. I'll say something like, wait, why do you think the way you think? Like, what did you eat for breakfast that made you so sour? And they never respond back.
Yeah. My next question is when oftentimes, we're in such a polarized society that people have
Yeah.
different perspectives on certain topics. Well, I'm wondering what your process is. Do you invite other people with, different views as you? Because oftentimes, we live in a polarized society, and
Mhm.
we think about one way and then or another way, and there's nothing. There's not sort of a healthy debate on the issues, so I'm wondering
Mhm.
how you sort of, what your take is on that.
I hope in the future I can create a platform where I can invite people in. But for me, I do try to read from diversified sources that like I'm a left-leaning person. I'm not like I tell my audience all the time, like I'm not someone who's super, super on the left, like, but I do tend to lean left when it comes to political parties. I always vote Democrat. Like that's kind of my mindset about the world, but I do try to read from sources that are a little more right leaning, right? That challenge the way that I think about the world. And even right now, I was annotating a piece about that I plan to share with my audience about how a lot of people in Texas have lost their trust in public health, and it's caused them to not vaccinate their kids. And it opened my mind to the point of like, I'm a person, I'm like, I not believe in vaccinations. I think people should absolutely be vaccinated. Like, that's a really good thing to do is make a health decision to protect others. And so for so long, I think, oh my God, you don't want to vaccinate your child? Like how could you not want to do that? But that article opened my mind to a lot of people who have just simply lost trust and don't know who to believe, what to trust. Um, so I think the important thing for me is that even if I don't agree with a view, it's up to me as an empathetic person, as a person with a soul and as a human, to try to understand where that other person is coming from. And also realize I still might not agree with them, but that doesn't mean that their opinion shouldn't be understood or heard. That's what causes the polarization.
Mm-hmm. So I know that I saw you virtually in the at the UW sh Shifting Spaces event with
Yes.
three other panelists. And I'm wondering, what was that like?
Oh, that was such a great panel. I think so. The cool thing about what I do is I'm not really in a box. Like, I mean, I float in this content space between media literacy, which isn't really a content area that is that capitalized on, education, journalism, print media. So I'm in the midst of all these spaces. So that was a great panel where I was with panelists where I learned more from them just going to breakfast before the panel because you have Teal, who's like a complete water expert,
Yes.
primarily in also, let me back up. All right. I'm like from the East Coast. I feel like every time I come to the West Coast, I realize we are living in like two totally different areas of the world, like the country. We live in the same country, but the way folks in the West care about the environment, care about water, care about indigenous people's rights is on a totally different playing field than the East Coast. So whenever I'm invited out on the West Coast, especially to have conversations about with one influencer who's all about indigenous and trans rights and somebody who's about water rights, all I can say is I'm just going to shut up and listen because you all are teaching me something that I don't even know about. What my expertise is how we should consume the information and what has worked for me. So it was a great experience because like Teal and I rode back to the airport together. I know way more about water than I've ever known. Um, and so it was a great experience. And then like as somebody who hopes to be a professor in the future, hopes to maybe be a college president one day, being on UW's campus was like it brought my heart some good feelings and warms and fuzzies because it reminded me of why I'm doing this and why I love to be in the education space. So tens across the board. And that was actually my first time in Seattle and Washington. So that was super cool.
Yeah, Seattle's a very nice city. It's got a lot of good stuff.
It does. I need to come back in the summer though, like for sure.
Yeah, it's a really nice time to go. Summer's a really good time to go to Seattle, especially since it's nice weather.
Exactly.
Yeah, to wrap this up, how can the sort of what can how can journalism, be better in ways to not just better inform people, but to adapt to
Yeah.
different technologies and different medium because it's ever changing.
Such a good question. I think the first thing is people want simple content, right? Like we got to keep it real. I mean, I can't quote this, but I think the national reading level at this point isn't even like, is it a middle school level, right? So most of the forms that a lot of the most popular forms of when we think of the Reuters, when we think of the APs, the New York Times, I mean, the way they are writing as somebody who has a master's degree, I have to look up the words. So if I don't know what's being talked about, you can't expect the United States to know what you're talking about or the world. So that's the first thing is people want things simple. They want things plain. So any way that you can get around your editor to do so, do that. The second thing is just like, right, they're good journalists and they're bad journalists. There's good content creators and there's bad content creators. And when people do good things, invite them in. Like work with content creators, build that relationship. What does it look like just asking them to come to the office for a day? What does it look like to have them say, hey, I saw that you mentioned something that I talked about. Would love to just have a quick Zoom call and open myself up to any questions. So content creators are not the enemy, but also there are bad content creators and all bad things crash and burn anyway. So we don't have to deal with that. Um, and then also, man, like I just feel like remembering that journalism should be fun. Like it's so cool that we live in a country where in our constitution something can happen and we are allowed to have people go and report on that. Like that is really a blessing. It is a privilege, whatever you want to call it. So I think as journalists, remembering that like you all are literally the second line, second, like you all are the reason we have democracy. So encouraging people to understand that is something that I hope journalists can do, and then also find some ways to make money because y'all need to get paid and y'all need
Yes.
your buck too. So that's what I would say.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right.